When you hear the call. The call was so loud and abrupt, Zaban jerked hard and spilled his tea, cursing as he brushed down the front of his robe, leaning forward to keep the hot liquid away from his skin. He was more concerned about the potential stain than the words booming over his head. "Zaban, son of Helen, you are called to undertake a perilous quest. Zaban threw up a quelling hand, even though he had no idea whether the owner of the voice could see him. "My requirements are clear. All calls to adventure are to be submitted in writing," he snapped. It was posted on his door. Could no one read these days? The portentor's voice fell silent. Zaban had barely taken a steadying breath when a gentle fizz heralded a gleam of iridescent sparks. A scroll appeared in mid-air in the middle of the room. Zaban sighed and reached for his gloves. The scroll wobbled a moment, as though getting its bearings, then arrowed through the air towards him. He snapped an incantation before it could reach his bare skin. The scroll froze. Zaban selected a pair of wooden tongs from the pencil pot on his desk and used them to grasp the scroll firmly. It wriggled when it realised it wasn't about to be unfurled and eagerly read, but from long experience Zaban anticipated the resistance, continuing the subduing incantation under his breath as he dropped the scroll into a magical cage and screwed the top firmly closed. Setting the caged enchanted scroll on the shelf, he shook his head. That was the third this week. He'd need to prepare more cages if they were going to continue at this rate, and then he'd have to decide what to do with the magic. Really, his to-do list was overflowing as it was. Whoever had the fanciful idea that he could spare enough time to jaunt off on magical quests and enchanted adventures was clearly deluded. Hadn't they seen his calendar? Sitting back down, Zaban picked up his tea and drained the cup. Then he sat back, thinking. The council had suggested the next enhancement to the village might be to automate the looms with magic. The spells for that shouldn't be too different from those he'd used to enchant the mill to work to command. He laced his hands on his belly and gave a nod of decision. He'd look into the matter after lunch. After lunch, however, Zaban was disturbed from his books by a knock at the door. He set his studies aside and swung the door open. On his step stood, what else? A mysterious stranger, garbed in a long, dark cloak. He looked past the figure. Yes, and it had even begun to rain, lightning flashing across the dark sky as though to make a point. "I'm seeking Zaban," the stranger said, his voice utterly ordinary. Not that Zaban was fooled for a moment. "If you swear there'll be no funny stuff, you can come in," Zaban muttered the grudging words and stood aside. He was pleased when the figure turned back the deep hood of his cloak and then removed the voluminous garment entirely, to find more ordinariness. His visitor was a man of middle years, grey sprinkled through his hair, of average height and with, mercifully, no ominous scars or fateful birthmarks visible. "I hoped you might help me," the visitor began. Zaban crossed his arms. "We'll see," was as far as he was willing to commit himself at this stage. If this individual had been sent with the last wish of a dying king, or entreaties to save a kingdom from dire enchantment, so help him he wouldn't be responsible for his actions. Undeterred by his less than welcoming response, the stranger nodded briefly. "I was told you have the very best—" He trailed off as he looked past Zaban, eyes widening and jaw sagging as he took in the floor-to-ceiling shelves behind Zaban's desk, and their contents. "I can hardly believe my eyes," the stranger spoke in a tone of subdued wonder, as the doubted orbs roamed the room. "I've never seen so many cage spells in a single place before." Zaban followed the fellow's gaze, although he wasn't stirred by the sight that met his eyes, more irritated. "They're mostly drained," he pointed out. "Mostly?" The stranger turned to face him, swallowing with an audible gulp. "You drained them?" he asked faintly, as though Zaban's comment had been unclear. "Naturally," Zaban confirmed. "The amount of magic was growing unstable. The things kept arriving." His visitor gaped gently. "Whoever taught you to drain a magical artifact? I was told there were no mages in Oakdale." "There aren't," Zaban agreed. "We don't hold truck with that sort of behaviour here. I taught myself." "You taught yourself?" The stranger's voice grew fainter with each word. A nod confirmed that notion. "How?" Zaban blinked. "I requested a few books from the capital's library. They were perfectly clear on the steps I needed to take." The stranger muttered something Zaban didn't quite catch. He elected not to ask for the words to be repeated. He didn't seek to extend the conversation. "How can I help you?" he offered, in hope of rapidly ridding himself of his guest. Yes. The stranger wiped his brow and bestowed a weak smile on Zaban. "Forgive me. My name is Piper Fisk. I was told this was the perfect place to buy something to repel magic. He glanced around the room once more. I confess, I supposed you were a dealer in magical artifacts, not an expert in magic yourself. I'm not an expert in magic, Zaban corrected him. Was the man not paying attention? I barely know a thing, just what I've had to learn to keep myself clear of the confounding situations that land on my doorstep. He gestured at the magical cages. Quite literally, in many instances. Fisk blinked. Can you help me? I'll see what I can do, Zaban agreed, since the man would doubtless plague him until he got what he needed. What's the problem? My daughters. A smile played around Fisk's lips as his attention was captured by the contents of his memories, rather than the contents of Zaban's house. They're very beautiful. Zaban grunted a noncommittal reply to that. No doubt their father thought so, as a parent should. It seemed the opinion wasn't pure bias, though, since he then added, I've had 4 princes knocking on my door seeking to marry them. He shook his head. They're smart, independent girls. Bella has an offer at the university for autumn, while Amy is a remarkable linguist and would like to travel. I'd hate to see them suffocate in stifling marriages when they could achieve so much more. I'm concerned their suitors are becoming more determined after rejection, rather than less. We received an enchanted apple just last week. Fortunately, I realised the issue before either had taken a bite. Zaban grunted in a more engaged tone. How unpleasantly underhand. Fisk bowed. Exactly so. Very well, that I can help you with. I strongly disapprove of idle royals trying to make off with our most promising youngsters. He faced the father. Do you have something belonging to your daughters? I brought a lock of each of their hair. Will that suffice? Admirably. Zaban strode to his desk, rustling through the detritus that littered the top, until he found a couple of pins. He set them in a crucible, took the hair from Fisk and added it to the bowl. Muttering the appropriate incantation, he held the crucible in his fingertips as magic coalesced in the bottom, whirling slowly, then picking up speed. As he spoke the final words, a fizz and a bang sent up a puff of sweet-smelling smoke. When Zaban blew it away, he was left with a pair of brooches, the hair combining with the pin to form a delicate knot and a secure clasp. He nodded in satisfaction, then held the crucible out to Fisk. That should keep them safe. The father made no move to take the items, staring at Zaban instead. That's not a draining spell, nor a caging one. No, Zaban frowned at Fisk's surprised tone. Those spells wouldn't have helped you or your daughters. No, I meant you know protective magic too. A finger jabbed towards the items Zaban had just conjured into being. Zaban looked down at the amulets, as though seeing them for the first time. I suppose I do. I guess my reading has rubbed off on me. He shrugged and offered the brooches to Fisk. Thank you. How much do I owe you? Zaban blinked. No charge. I didn't help you because I want money. You didn't... You're giving me them? For free? He shook his head. You're the most unusual mage I've ever come across. A frown tugged Zaban's brows together. I'm not a mage. I told you, we don't approve of mages in Oakdale. No, you said. Fisk agreed inattentively while he pushed the brooches into an inner pocket. He straightened up with a smile when that task was done. I guess I'm simply happy they approve of you. He chuckled. Zaban didn't join in, unsure of the joke. Thank you. You have my undying gratitude. Zaban escorted his visitor to the door, where he slipped back into the voluminous folds of the cloak. When Zaban swung the door open, it was raining harder still. Fisk sighed. I'm glad I booked a room at Oakdale's Inn for the night. Always wise to plan ahead, Zaban said approvingly, relieved there could be no suggestion of him offering house room to the man. He shut the door and pushed back his sleeves as he returned to his desk. More cages were needed. He might as well prepare them while the mood was on him. The rain continued to beat hard against his windows all night, providing Zaban with a lullaby which ensured a good night's sleep. Until he was rudely awakened shortly after dawn by another call to adventure, which had the temerity to materialize in his bedchamber. He was compelled to throw a pillow over the wax-sealed letter when it tried to push itself into his hand. He left it attempting to wriggle its way out while he went downstairs to fetch a cage, muttering all the while. It proved to be especially timely that he'd spent the previous evening preparing magical cages, because in addition to his unwelcome alarm call, yet another call to adventure arrived while he was eating breakfast. This one was engraved in tiny letters on a palm-sized rock that clattered to life on his dining table with a puff of licorice-scented magic. Zaban didn't make the mistake of attempting to read the words. Did anyone think he was still that naive? He simply used gloves and tongues to drop the rock into another cage. Once he'd set that onto his shelves, he turned to face the room, hands on hips. "Anyone else want to try anything?" he asked aloud, his tone understandably tetchy. "I have things to do today. Kindly make yourselves known now, or leave me in peace for a day or two at least." Was it too much to ask? He gained no reply, so he grimaced and returned to his disturbed breakfast. Only time would tell whether he'd get peace, or if this was only the start of a new deluge. The meteorological deluge continued apace, with the rain showing no sign of letting up. Zaban needed his cloak and waterproof hat just for the short trip into his garden to feed the hens and collect their eggs. The poor creatures huddled under their hut, feathers bedraggled and damp. "I'm very sorry," he told them, as he scattered corn along the edge of the shelter so it wouldn't get wet. "If I could stop the rain, I would." The hens leapt upon their meal, while Zaban straightened, a nasty suspicion prickling at his mind. He tipped his head back and stared into the clouds, blinking rain off his eyelashes while he muttered a rapid incantation. He sighed with relief when his spell encountered no magic, and turned his attention back to his feathered livestock. "It's not a magical storm, just natural," he told them, although the hens didn't seem worried. "We simply have to wait it out." Zaban had planned to spend the day checking the forest boundaries and topping up the spells that kept wild animals from troubling Oakdale. Given the rain, he'd changed his mind. But as he trudged back to the house, he changed his mind again. He was wet now. He might as well undertake the chore while he had magic to spare. Then he could spend the afternoon in front of the fire, reading, unless yet more magic arrived to ruin his day. Decision made, Zaban ducked back into the house to collect one of the caged spells, then set out towards the forest that began little more than a mile distant from the boundary of the village. Once inside the shelter of the tree's canopies, the rain eased off, an occasional plop of water sliding off the leaves, in place of the incessant deluge he had walked through. Zaban set back the hood of his cloak and checked his spells. He'd expected to need to drain the spell he was carrying to top up the enchantments, but that magic had barely been diminished. The boundary spells had been in place for several years now. It seemed the predators that lived inside the forest had learned that nothing good could be gained from approaching Oakdale, and now they didn't even try. Zaban was, of course, grateful for that, but his thoughts turned inevitably to the spell in his pocket, as well as the 7 other caged spells he'd gained over the last week. He had to find something to use up the magic, or it would become unstable and cause who knew what trouble. He sucked his teeth, leaning against the trunk of an oak. If he were prepared to sacrifice his afternoon of reading, he might meet with the village elders today and try a spell or two on the looms. But no, he was a selfish man. He wanted to enjoy at least some of his day. The looms could wait until tomorrow. If he didn't set boundaries, he'd soon find every minute of his day was taken up with magic. That was no life for anyone. Rain falling in a constant, gentle hush, Zaban rested against the oak and looked back the way he'd come. His house was little more than a grey blur. The other dwellings of the village clustered behind his. It was hardly a picturesque view, but Zaban found his lips curving regardless. Far better than a view, it was home. Warmth unfurled in his chest despite the occasional chill raindrop tracking down his back. Oakvale was his home, and he was never going to be tempted away from it by supposedly glamorous calls to seek out buried treasure, or long-lost temples, or artifacts imbued with magic. He liked it here, and he planned to never leave. Oakvale had always been a welcoming, happy place, and it had only improved in the past 4 years. Protected from predators, their harvests had grown exponentially. It was years since they'd lost a sheep or even a lamb to wolves, which had enabled their trade in woven goods to burgeon. The weir across the river kept them safe from flooding, while the water piped to a pump behind every house saved hours of time. The children now spent several hours each day in school, rather than collecting water or watching the flocks, and they all had ambitions. Like Fisk's daughters, they aspired now to be doctors or traders or scholars. Several, to Zaban's dismay, had even expressed an interest in studying magic. The idea of letting the village children closer to magic alarmed Zaban, but he grudgingly saw the advantage. If magic was better understood, it could be better controlled, and perhaps in the future no one would need to suffer as he did. He could but hope. "Hi there, friend Zaban!" Zaban spun at the cry, yanked from his musings. It was Fisk who greeted him. The man headed out of the forest back towards the village on horseback. His hair was plastered to his head, while his horse was burdened with a second passenger, a visibly pregnant woman sitting up behind him, swathed in what Zaban thought was Fisk's own cloak. As he stepped out of the shelter of the trees, Zaban realized Fisk rode in the vanguard of a straggle of people. Most were clutching bundles, a couple leading goats on tethers. "What in the world?" Fisk reined in level with him. "I left first thing in the morning, but I didn't get far. Riverdale is flooded." The village further to the east, and nestled alongside the river, even closer than Oakdale was. These poor souls, Fisk jerked a thumb, although there was no doubt who he meant, have lost everything. Come along, we'll shelter you until you decide what's to be done. Zaban extended the invitation, confident it would be echoed by the elders and all the people of Oakdale. Fisk touched his heels to his horse's flanks, and the beast resumed its walk to the village. Zaban fell into step beside a stout woman. How many are you? The woman, one of Riverdale's elders, replied, 212 souls. She gestured to the woman on horseback. Likely to be 213 by the end of the week. Not to worry, we'll give you a place to stay. Warmth slid through him again. Oakvale was wealthy enough the invitation was easy to make, and would be just as easy to fulfil. If the displaced people couldn't all be accommodated in people's homes, the schoolhouse could be used as a dormitory until better arrangements were made. 3 hours later, everything was settled. The people of Riverdale had been welcomed to the hearts and homes of Oakdale, with billets sorted. The rain had finally stopped, and the workers of both villages were already discussing returning to assess what could be done to save the flooded houses and get the village back on its feet. Zaban chewed on a pasty that had been thrust into his hand by one of his helpful neighbours and surveyed the scene. Satisfaction filled him more comprehensively than the pasty. If he'd departed on whatever fool quest the past few calls were summoning to, he wouldn't have been here to help. Moreover, if he'd left the village the first time he'd been called to adventure, Oakdale would be in no state now to support its beleaguered neighbour. He shook his head, and magic seriously supposed it knew best. You're Zaban. He swallowed down the last of his lunch as he turned, surveying the individual speaking his name. I am, Yara, she supplied, holding out a hand. He clasped the fingers briefly. Can I help you, Yara? He queried. The lass had clearly come from Riverdale. Perhaps she'd been missed in the arrangements. I'm pleased to meet you, she told him calmly. I was coming to find you even before today's catastrophe. You were? Zaban was immediately wary. She didn't look like a switched-to-birth princess, but who was to say what magic might be lurking if he dropped his guard? I've lived peacefully in Riverdale for 16 years, but I received a call to adventure just yesterday. The lass held a scroll in a slim hand, her lips twisting in a wry smile. Oddly enough, it told me to go to the crossroads at break of dawn if I wanted to fulfil my destiny. Why is that odd? Zaban relaxed a degree. It sounded to him exactly like the usual sort of claptrap calls to adventure used to trap the unwary. It's odd because I must have walked past the crossroads about that time, but I was fleeing my drowned home, not heading on a quest. I don't want to leave my family and go far, far away. Especially not now, they need me. Please, will you show me how to deal with unwanted magic? She looked up, dark eyes wide with appeal. Anger and compassion fought a brief battle in Zaban's chest. Why was magic determined to steal away youngsters who had their own fates well in hand? Well, it should know better than to mess with Zaban, but he was always grimly content to repeat the lesson. He set a hand on Yara's shoulder. I'm happy to help you. He turned them both, steering her towards his cottage. There are some useful books I'll ask you to read, then I'll show you how to deal with that scroll. The magic can't be very powerful since it hasn't compelled you to leave. He gave a wry tilt of his head. Although nature took care of that, I suppose. He gestured at the scroll. Their strength is likely to increase as you ignore them, but there are all sorts of good things you can do for your village when you have magic going begging. Is there something we can do about the river? She asked. For sure. I installed a weir to control the flow past Oakdale, with a twist to the magic which keeps every house in the village supplied with water without any need to fetch and carry. I'll show you how it's done. Thank you. I'd be so happy if only I can make life easier for my family and my neighbours. Yara was smiling, her countenance lit up with thoughts of what she could do. And Magic thought she should abandon her family for some spurious quest, not on Zaban's watch. He threw open the door and escorted Yara into his cottage. Casting his cloak and hat aside, he strode to the fire. Tea first, he told Yara, coaxing the embers to life. We'll talk through the general principles while we drink. Yara nodded, looking around curiously as she took a seat. Zaban set out the tea things. He'd never expected to become a teacher, but he was accustomed to unexpected twists in his life. Teaching was still far better than anything magic might conjure up to tempt him with. That was When You Hear the Call by Katy Haye. Thanks for listening.